Howard Hughes had it all: unlimited wealth, fame, and power. He built planes that broke records, romanced Hollywood's biggest stars, and shaped industries from aviation to film. But behind the fortune was a man trapped by his own mind: paranoia, obsession, and isolation. In the end, the real battle wasn't in the boardroom or in the sky. It was in his head. Let's go. Howard Robar Hughes Jr. was born in either 1905 or 1906 in Houston, Texas. His family would later become very wealthy thanks to a single revolutionary invention: the two-cone rotary drill bit. Now, this was invented by his father, Howard Hughes Sr., in 1909, and this drill bit could grind through hard rock much faster and more efficiently than anything that came before. It transformed the oil industry, unlocking access to previously unreachable petroleum reserves, and it turned the Hughes Tool Company into a gold mine. Oil barons lined up to license it, and by the 1920s, the company was earning millions per year in royalties. Now, thanks to his father, young Howard grew up surrounded by machines and wealth. And what made it better was that Howard was a mechanical prodigy. At just 11, he built Houston's first wireless radio transmitter. At age 12, he repaired and rebuilt a broken Model T engine. And by 14, he was flying planes. However, in 1922, tragedy struck. His mother died suddenly from complications related to a pregnancy. And 2 years later, his father died unexpectedly of a heart attack. Howard, only just 18, inherited 75% of the Hughes fortune and was declared a legal adult by the courts. With his newfound independence and millions in the bank, Hughes enrolled in Caltech, then later Rice Institute, now Rice University, but he didn't last long in either place. Now, Hughes wasn't interested in lectures or textbooks. He wanted to build, to move fast, to innovate, and so he dropped out of college and took full control of the Hughes Tool Company. And he moved to Los Angeles with one goal in mind: to make movies. Now, Howard headed west to Hollywood, and in 1926 he produced Swell Hogan, which was a flop and was never released, but that didn't discourage Howard. So he put more time and energy into a new project: Hell's Angels. This was a World War I aviation epic unlike anything that the world had seen. Now, production had begun in 1927, but halfway through filming, Hughes decided that the silent format wasn't good enough anymore. He scrapped much of the film and reshot it as a talkie, after the success of The Jazz Singer had ushered in a new cinematic era. Now, the film was shot over 3 years and cost about $4 million, equivalent to about $70 million today. And Hell's Angels premiered in 1930 and was a box office smash, praised for its daring dogfight scenes and technical innovation. After that, Hughes became known as the ultimate Hollywood risk-taker, and he followed it up with a string of movies that pushed boundaries and ruffled feathers. The Front Page, 1931, a fast-talking newspaper comedy that received critical acclaim and 2 Oscar nominations. Scarface, 1932, an ultra-violent gangster film that was so controversial, censors delayed its release for over a year. Now, Hughes released it anyway, calling out censorship as un-American. And The Outlaw in 1943, infamous for its poster and not its plot. The movie starred Jane Russell and was marketed around her bust line, which Hughes had literally invented a special bra to enhance. The film was banned in several states, but it still made millions. And when Hughes wasn't directing stars, he was dating them. Actresses like Katarina Hepburn, Olivia de Havilland, Lana Turner, and Rita Hayworth. Now, for Hughes, these weren't just films. They were provocations. Hughes wasn't in the movie business for art or for Oscars. He wanted to dominate. And for a while, he did. He ran RKO Pictures, one of the Big Five studios from 1948 to 1955, and personally greenlit films or canceled them based on his own gut instincts. But the deeper he got into Hollywood, the more eccentric he became. He'd fire entire production teams overnight. He'd recut movies behind directors' backs, and he often vanished for weeks at a time, working in total secrecy. However, there was no denying his influence. He changed what a movie mogul could be. Not just a financier or a producer, but a daring showman, willing to risk everything for a spectacle. While Hollywood praised Howard Hughes for his blockbuster hits and celebrity romances, Hughes had his sights set much higher. Literally. Flying wasn't just a hobby for Hughes. It was a full-blown obsession. He once said, "I intend to be the greatest aviator in the world." And in true Hughes fashion, he backed that up with bold action and blank checks. In 1932, he founded the Hughes Aircraft Company, a private aviation firm dedicated to pushing the boundaries of flight. Now, Hughes was not interested in copying the competition. He wanted to outfly, outspeed, and outthink every other aircraft designer alive. And that dream took shape in the H-1 Racer. In 1935, Hughes personally piloted this polished aluminum beauty to break the world land plane speed record, hitting a whopping 352 miles an hour. With its sleek retractable landing gear and flush riveted surface, it was decades ahead of its time. But Hughes wasn't content with speed alone. In 1938, he circled the globe in just 91 hours, a record-breaking feat that turned him into a national hero. Tens of thousands of people gathered to cheer him on, and reporters called him the lone eagle of the modern age. He was even congratulated by President FDR. Hughes was now more than just a wealthy daredevil. He was America's next aviation icon. But Hughes didn't stop at building planes. He wanted to control the skies himself. So in 1939, he began buying up stocks of Trans World Airlines, or TWA, eventually becoming its largest shareholder. While most airlines leased their planes from manufacturers like Boeing or Douglas, Hughes had a bold new idea: let TWA own the most advanced aircraft outright. So, in the mid-1940s, he struck a secret deal with Lockheed to develop a new plane, the Constellation, or the Connie for short. With its pressurized cabin, long range, and elegant design, it was like anything else in the sky. TWA became the first airline to operate the Constellation, turning it into a luxury transcontinental carrier and putting it in direct competition with industry giants like Pan Am. But Hughes' hands-on approach was both visionary and chaotic. He micromanaged aircraft design, delayed deliveries, and clashed with regulators. Still, under his control, TWA became one of the most prestigious airlines in the world. It seemed like everything Howard Hughes touched turned to gold. His companies were soaring, and his name was being celebrated around the country. But as he was breaking records in the sky, the world below him was becoming much darker. War was coming, and when it did, Howard Hughes and his empire would be called upon, and this would lead to his greatest, most ambitious project yet, but also his biggest scandal. As World War II erupted, Howard Hughes wasn't just a national hero. He was a man with something to prove. The US military was desperate for innovative aircraft, and Hughes pitched himself as the perfect solution. Thus, he secured lucrative government contracts for two ambitious planes. First was the XF-11, a high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft meant to rival anything the Axis powers could put into the sky. And next was the H-4 Hercules, better known as the Spruce Goose, a massive wooden cargo plane designed to carry troops and tanks across the Atlantic without risking Nazi submarines. To support these projects and more, Hughes turned his aviation company into a military-industrial powerhouse. Hughes aircraft grew rapidly, developing radar systems, missiles, and later satellite technologies, which would become essential to the American defense. At its peak, the company employed over 80,000 people, cementing Hughes not just as a daring pilot, but as a vital player in the US war machine. But bold ideas and sky-high ambition ran headfirst into reality. The projects were plagued by delays, ballooning costs, and bureaucratic chaos. Hughes was notoriously controlling, insisting on exotic materials and untested methods, often pushing engineers to the brink. Furthermore, the XF-11 turned into a nightmare. In 1946, during a test flight over Los Angeles, the plane malfunctioned. Hughes crashed into a Beverly Hills neighborhood, destroying 3 homes and nearly dying. He suffered multiple fractures, third-degree burns, and severe head trauma. Then came the Senate hearings. In 1947, Hughes was dragged before Congress to answer accusations of war profiteering and wasting taxpayer money. The Spruce Goose had cost the government $23 million and it never saw action in the war. And the XF-11 was late, over budget, and flawed. Critics called him a con man in a pilot's helmet. But Hughes didn't back down. In a now legendary showdown, he told the Senate, "I put the sweat of my life into this thing. I have my reputation rolled up in it. And I have stated several times that if it's a failure, I will probably leave this country and never come back. And I mean it." To prove his point, Hughes flew the Spruce Goose just once, on November 2nd, 1947. And despite its size, the wooden giant lifted 70 feet off the water and flew for about a mile. It was the largest aircraft ever to fly at the time and proved his accusers wrong. Now Hughes had made his point, but behind the scenes with the hearing and the crash and the mounting stress, Hughes was starting to unravel, and the real turbulence were just beginning. As his empire expanded, Howard Hughes began retreating from the world, and by the late 1950s, this charismatic mogul was now a recluse, driven by extreme germophobia and paranoia. He locked himself in dark hotel rooms for months, sometimes years, surrounded by boxes of tissues, jars of urine, and handwritten memos. He stopped cutting his hair and his nails, and he ordered the same meals every day and watched the same films on endless repeat. He trusted very few people, except for a small circle of advisors. In 1966, Hughes checked into the Desert Inn in Las Vegas and refused to leave. When the hotel tried to evict him, he simply bought the entire place. Then he bought 5 more casinos, as well as airports, TV stations, mining claims, and swaths of real estate across Nevada. By the early 1970s, Hughes had disappeared entirely from public life. No one had seen him in years. Rumors swirled. Was he alive? Was he a captive? Was he controlling an empire from the shadows, or barely clinging to reality? But even as he spiraled into isolation, Hughes made one move that would outlive every other part of his empire. In 1953, he quietly created the Howard Hughes Medical Institute in Delaware. Publicly, it was a non-profit focused on advancing biomedical research. But privately, it was a masterstroke of financial strategy. Hughes transferred all of Hughes aircraft stocks into the institute, turning it into a tax-exempt charitable foundation that he controlled. For a man constantly consumed by germs, disease, and fear of dying, it's almost poetic that his greatest and most enduring contribution to society was in medicine. In 1972, author Clifford Irving claimed to have co-written Hughes' official autobiography. The world went nuts, until Hughes, in hiding, called into a press conference to deny it. It was one of the last times he'd ever spoken publicly. Hughes spent the last years of his life moving between countries, like Nicaragua, the Bahamas, and Mexico, trying to avoid taxes and public scrutiny. Eventually, he died on April 5, 1976, on a flight from Acapulco to Houston. He left behind an estate worth about $2.5 billion, but with no valid will. Dozens of relatives and fake heirs came forward, and the legal battles would last for years. Eventually, Hughes' fortune would be divided among his closest living relatives. Howard Hughes left behind a legacy that was brilliant, chaotic, and impossible to ignore. Hughes' aircraft was sold to General Motors and later became part of Raytheon, continuing its legacy in defense and aerospace. The Howard Hughes Medical Institute remains one of the most prestigious medical research foundations in the world, with an endowment in the tens of billions. And in 2004, Spaceship One, funded by aerospace designer Burt Rutan, a Hughes protege, became the first private spacecraft to reach space. And then there was the way that Howard Hughes redefined the modern icon of genius entrepreneur. In 1963, Marvel Comics debuted Tony Stark, a wealthy playboy inventor who built weapons, dated actresses, and eventually became the armored superhero known as Iron Man. Stark was directly modeled on Hughes, a man who could invent, build, fly, and dazzle the world, all while hiding personal demons. That legacy carried into films. The 2004 movie The Aviator, directed by Martin Scorsese and starring Leonardo DiCaprio as Hughes, brought his story to a new generation. It won 5 Academy Awards and earned over $213 million worldwide. Hughes wasn't just a businessman, or an aviator, or a recluse. He was a blueprint for what we now call tech visionaries or eccentric billionaires. The kind of person who can reshape industries, command headlines, and haunt the edges of genius and madness. Howard Hughes was one of the most brilliant, eccentric, and tormented minds of the 20th century. He reshaped aviation, he challenged Hollywood, and he funded medical research that saved lives. But he also spiraled into obsession, hiding from the world that he helped build. He had everything: fame, power, fortune, but the one thing he couldn't control was his mind. So the next time you board an aircraft or watch a blockbuster film, remember this: you're living in a world that he helped imagine. And with that, I'm Evan, and thanks for watching. If you liked what you just saw, then click on the video here. Also, if you haven't, like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any future videos.